Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Only Human, our podcast where we try to close the distance between who we are today and who we can be tomorrow or are capable of being in the future. So today, we've got another special guest, and I'll get to him in just a moment. But I want to start out like we usually do, but with slight variation. So the last few weeks, we've been kicking off with some news that I call This Week in Safety Land. But today, because we have an expert on leadership with us, I'm changing it just a little bit, called This Week in Leadership Land. And in fact, I could have almost called it Any Week in Leadership Land, because it seems these things are coming fast and furious and far more often than they probably need to. But anyways, here we go. First article is titled Navy Fires Commanding Officer, Command Master Chief of Expeditionary Security Squadron. Both the commanding officer and command master chief of the Maritime Expeditionary Security Squadron number 4, based in Virginia Beach, Virginia, were fired last Friday, the Navy announced. Commander Brett Robley and Command Master Chief Felix Phillips were relieved, quote, due to a loss in confidence in their ability to perform leadership duties. You're going to hear that phrase a lot. Article number 2, a gentleman that I happen to know personally, Colonel Mark D. Bortnam, a former F-18 pilot with more than 30 years in the Marine Corps, was relieved of his duties as commander of Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort, South Carolina. A Marine spokesman said the reason was, quote, due to a loss of trust and confidence in Bortnam's ability to command. Now, the military often uses this phrase kind of as an opaque justification to avoid giving details on what happened. And then one more. The top enlisted, just to be fair and not biased as an ex-Air Force guy, the top enlisted leader of Air Force Special Ops Command is fired amidst an investigation. Command Master Chief Master Sergeant, Anthony Green was fired as the top enlisted advisor to the Air Force Special Operations Command for a loss in confidence. So for the past 2 or 3 years, I've been clipping these stories. I was counting them this morning. I have at least 30 of them. And if I dug a little harder, I think that number is closer to 50 of senior military leaders, all the way up to general officers, that have been relieved unceremoniously of their leadership positions. And this has an impact on organizations all the way up and down the chain of command for sure. So what the heck is going on? And to help us unravel that today, we have one of the world's most leading authorities on leadership. Tom Casey and I ran into each other at a conference in Canada a few years back, where we were on a panel together talking about a variety of things related to human performance, and leadership was certainly part of that. Tom's the author of 7 books on leadership, and his most recent, at least I think it's your most recent, Tom, is titled Leadership's Future, Confronting Not Condoning, which seems pretty apropos for those of us that serve underneath some of these leaders, right? The book focuses on the desire of employees, right? So he took the position of the subordinates, right? The desire of the employees that the leaders confront and not condone inappropriate leadership behaviors, whatever that might be. And we're going to talk about that. More than that in just a minute. Tom's the founder and managing principal of Discussion Partner Collaborative. Big company, has over 200 advisors around the world, 21 global locations. And during his 45-year career, he's consulted in over 20 countries and virtually every economic sector on leadership issues. He's the author of over 600 articles. So maybe we'll talk about meeting deadlines, because that's a bane of my existence as well, Tom. Books, blogs. He's been published in a whole range of magazines, periodicals, social media sites. 6 bestsellers on the topic of leadership and executive transitions. I suspect this most recent one will be his 7th. And it was listed as bestseller pre-publication. Not only that, Tom has had assignments around the world looking at leadership in different cultures, places like London, Prague, Caracas. Presently, he splits his time between Peru and the United States. A bachelor's degree from University of Alaska. He also holds a master's and MBA from Rivier University. He's a graduate of the Yale School of Management Executive Management Program. He's got a military background, both in the United States Air Force, go blue, and Army Special Operations veteran. He retired from the Army Reserve as a colonel, so he knows something about leadership from the actual practical standpoint inside the military. So welcome, Tom, to Only Human. What the hell is going on here? Why are so many leaders that have proven the mettle to climb to those positions suddenly fall so hard and fast?
Well, the word frightening probably doesn't go far enough, okay, particularly in the recent past. Tony, well, first off, thank you for having me as a guest. It's great to see you again. But I think there's four things that are happening simultaneously, okay? One is that there appears to be a purge, not only in terms of the military, but also in terms of the commercial space, that anything having to do with DEI is perceived to have been, well, you had leprosy and now we need to get you out of the magic kingdom. And unfortunately, it is no longer about competence and proficiency. You're looking at the whole issue here in terms of, regardless of whether or not it's military or civilian, is that person too woke? And or are those companies too focused on those things that are counterintuitive to those people who are leading right now? Again, commercial and political and military. But I think the thing that's troubling, and I was very struck by the most recent article you wrote in terms of integrity, and that was published, I think it was the 14th. What's happening, based on what you're doing and what we're doing, there's a coincidence here, which is our research started right coming out of COVID. And what we were posing, and we had over 2,000 participants in a book that was published in 2022. We were saying, okay, great, we've survived this. What are you expecting to see from leaders that you really want to see now? And it was unambiguous: empathy, transparency, and accountability. What you're also looking at was this book that we just published, came out in November. We continued the research with another 2,000. This is 4,000 unduplicated contributors. And we were essentially saying, what are the behaviors you really would choose not to see? And they were hypocrisy, bias, intolerance, expediency, and aggression. Now, when you look at those 7, desirable, undesirable, and let's just take this whole mess associated with this Signal app, to have an overlap between what we're seeing in commercial and military, that there's no good news in that. You had a group of people, 4 of whom, as far as I know, were ex-military, using an unsecured app where they were communicating classified information, including attack plans, with forces already in theater, with an unintended participant being a news editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and doing it in such a way that was very timely in terms of the potential launch of a military action. There's like no good news in those sentences because there's dysfunction on 4 areas. All right. And it goes back to the whole issue here of leaders are those people you trust, and those leaders are those people who you know are looking out for your best interests, and the leaders are those people you know are good at their jobs. And the dysfunctionality here is, why were they using an app that was not secure versus using a SCIF? Why was the vetting process for who was even on the communication, including somebody from the news media, somebody who was not particularly popular with this current administration? Third is, why were they sharing classified information, including targets? And fourth is, just as a general rule, with all of the hacking going on, why were they doing this at all? They had the potential to put, God willing, was looking out for us here because nobody was hurt because of this. But there's three outcomes from this, circling back to leadership, not only in the military, but commercial, which coincides with the writings you're doing and the interviews you're doing on your podcasts and the research we're doing and the books we're writing, is people expect more from us and we're not delivering. And one of the other problems is we do have people who are stepping up and fulfilling their oath or they're fulfilling their obligation. And they're being criticized, if not eliminated, for really stupid reasons, which is kind of leading to this vacuum that we're seeing. The dismissals and the accusing General Milley of treason and the dismissal of the chairperson of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because of DEI and just this chaos that's being created in terms of the geopolitical and readiness via NATO and other areas on the military side was happening on the commercial side. And this is where there's the overlap, is associates are expecting more from their leaders right now because they are apprehensive as to what's going on. It's a very confusing time, geopolitically, domestically, and economically. All three of those are forming the troika of unease for a lot of people, and they want their leaders to step up, whether they're in uniform or not. There's a concept that we've been using, and it's driven by two things, Tony, that resonate with, I would hope, with your background as well. There's a Confucius saying that if your whole reason for being is to punish, dig two graves, because ultimately it's not going to be sustainable. And the second is there's an author, Jim Collins, who wrote a book about 20 years ago that's still out there and still referred to, called Good to Great. And the first principle that he had there is first get the right people on the bus. And now we have to ask and answer the question, whether it's the armed forces, whether it's the cabinet, whether it's our elected officials, whether it's our executives in commercial enterprises or NGOs, are the right people on the bus. And frankly, there's a large level of concern of those people who are being led, that they're not on the bus. And if they're on the bus, even if they have the proficiency, they're on it for the wrong reasons.
So
go
ahead. Good. I was going to jump in a little bit, and I want to go back because all of this leadership challenges, problems, date way back, right? And one of the things that I think on the economic side, in the commercial sector, goes back, and you referenced Jim Collins, I'll reference the chairman of GE, the Welsh one, right?
Right.
When he took an organization that was basically unbreakable, right? And moved it from that unbreakable status, that big, high quality, we think things through, we collaborate, into the Welsh way, which was, of course, as you know, maximizing profitability for the shareholders. And I think you could look at the same thing and apply it to Boeing's leadership over the past few years. And what I want to get at is selection of leaders, because now, and that was a very popular book, by the way. I mean, I have it, read it cover to cover. It's now I'm wondering if we're selecting leaders for short-term gain, expediency, or whether we are selecting leaders. Did I say electing leaders? Selecting leaders for quick returns. And if it's the latter, I think it comes in, and here's where I'm going to tie into that article you referenced. I wrote an article on LinkedIn. I have a periodical, I guess you'd say, a series of articles called Professionalism and Workmanship. And I wrote an article that said integrity should not be a career killer, right? And it was it goes well beyond whistleblowers. It goes
Mhm.
to people being willing to contribute to their safety management systems or their college management systems, or walk into the quote open door of their boss and say, hey, something smells down here on the shop floor, or maybe in management. So I wonder at this point in our history whether we're approaching a fulcrum point where we're going to begin to look at long-term leadership, long-term impacts of leadership as opposed to short-term ones. So as I look at all of your desired behaviors, empathy, transparency, accountability, collaboration, and the other ones, hypocrisy, bias, intolerance, expediency, and aggression, I want to unpack those a little bit with that in mind. So I'll go off transmit mode and let you respond a little bit.
Yeah, I've got three reactions. There's a great book called Power Failure on the history of General Electric. And frankly, back in the day, they were a client. Okay, and I spent some time, I actually met Mr. Welch twice. And a couple of things that I would say about under his leadership, even though he has the neutron jack, et cetera, two things that I really did admire about his leadership. One was the commitment he had and others had to the development of future leaders. It was very aggressive. So there was the development strategy. And the other issue here that is they had a very organized succession strategy for him and others. And there were four potentials for him. They chose a gentleman who unfortunately did not do all that well. Mistakes are made. Okay, so even if you have a perfect process, it may not have the best outcome. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is a difference between behaviors and proficiencies. In our executive transition work, working with successors, what we have found is that if I'm dealing with a baby boomer successor right now, what they tell us with very degree of legitimacy is that there are deficiencies in four areas of those people that they are thinking have the potential to replace them. One is that they are not global enough. Okay, a lot of these folks have not had a chance to have expatriate assignments or move around or travel internationally. That's one. Second is they do not write very well. They can do dancing animals on a PowerPoint, but they can't write a paragraph. Okay. Third is the definition of collaboration is more swapping emails than it is, as you and I grew up, going into a room and having to persuade somebody to your point of view. And the other one that took us a while to wrestle to the ground is that they're not intellectually curious. They really read headlines on their phone. They read things that are associated with whatever domain they're in, but they're not reading biographies of Winston Churchill or President Wilson or folks that have had to have challenges in leadership to try to understand when things weren't working very well, how did they get out of it? Okay. Now, it's kind of leading me, circling back to the point that you're talking about, the difference between short-term and long-term. Right now, we're in a short-term mess that has implications for the long-term. We have crisis in confidence in terms of leaders, and the transition to that is in terms of outcomes. We have respect issues with our other countries and inside. We have belligerence that's just front and center. We have issues here of trust. And that's not only looking at, that's, I don't want to dive into the tariff war, et cetera, but right now, people are very anxious. They're anxious on the short term. And this goes back to the point you were just making, Tony. The decisions we make now have long-term implications. And long-term, in my mind, is frankly probably the next 12 to 18 months. We're right at a precipice. I mean, the Yogi Berra quote, to me, is the most appropriate. When you come to the fork in the road, take it. I had my own ideas as to which forks we should take, but what I'm looking at is we need to realize and appreciate that those people who we are ostensibly responsible for leading are holding us to a standard right now, and we better step up. It's gut check time. There is no margin for error right now. We're in too much chaos, and that chaos is translated into cruelty. You wrote about the whistleblowers, and you mentioned Ms. Watkins from Enron. And there were two others. When she and two other women were on the cover of Time that year. I think it was 2002 or 5. All three were whistleblowers. But as recently as this week, we had a young man in IT, National Labor Relations Board, okay, who filed a whistleblower's complaint, because he thought that the data that the Doge people were using or pulling out of NLRB was being exported, and he could show that some of the people who looked at wherever those platforms were that were being exported to had been compromised. He filed the whistleblower complaint, and he was threatened. Instead of people saying, geez, maybe we ought to find out if there's a real problem here, they take out their animus and threaten this young man. And that takes a lot of courage to be a whistleblower. It takes integrity. But the thing is, and when I was reading your article, the transition that I was making from your article to our research is, you can't have integrity unless you have accountability. And then the question becomes, who are you accountable to? And with military officers, you're accountable starting with the Constitution, then it's to your mission, and then it's to your troops. In commercial sector, it is to your company, it is to your associates, your shareholders, and it is also to yourself. And that's where I think that we need to start thinking a lot more holistically on the definition of leadership, with words like integrity and accountability, which seem to be, the bunt of jokes in a bar room right now.
Well, it certainly, and it has long been this, in my humble opinion, words like accountability, personal responsibility are often, like you said, joked at, but viewed as 4-letter words, right?
Sure, right.
What a lot of people want is control. But I want to go back to something you said that was pretty fascinating, because I think it's right up our alley to talk about. You said the two things that were pointed out, that when you're looking at new leaders and selecting them, their inability to write well. And I'm going to come back to the issue of these things here in a minute,
sure,
and how we get on the news. But I once had a boss, his name was Jerry Williams, and he selected me to be the National Aviation Officer for the U.S. Forest Service, Assistant Director of Fire Aviation in the Washington office, which was in charge of a huge program, right? $750 million a year just in firefighting money, but then you had all the aircraft and all the people and all the contracts, and I was not ready for this job. I was a year out of being a knuckle dragon B-1 bomber pilot and professor at the Air Force Academy, but I'd written a couple of books, and for one reason or another, I got this job. And he goes, well, do you have any questions for me? And I go, yeah, a really important one. Why me? And he went on to say some very nice things. And then he said, but at the end of the day, Tony, I selected you because of your books. And I go, my books? What do that have to do with anything? He says, anyone who can write well, I know can think well. And he said, all things being equal, and there were a lot of qualified candidates, I will always pick the better writer. And I thought, wow. And that is a lost art, right? I mean, writing's not easy. And, I don't know whether the first time you sat down at a typewriter, which I expect you did, just like I did before word processors or anything, you wrote that first page and said, sweet mother of God, this sucks. This is terrible. I'll never be able to do this, right? And like everything else, it's a long, hard pull to learn how to communicate well with the written word. So I'm going to come back to this idea of how people get their news in just a second, but I want to give you a chance to comment on that.
Well, I kind of embrace your concept, and I'll use myself as an example. In 1982, I came from, I had a clinical graduate degree, and I was involved with not-for-profits and more focused on providing advice via therapy in a therapeutic environment. And I joined my first consultancy, which was focused on executive development, a place called Harvard House in Boston. And everything was writing. And I was internal initially, and my memorandums were at best unclear. And, and that's being kind, Tony. And my boss at the time, okay, who was a triathlete, Harvard Northwestern MBA, brought me into the office and said, Tom, I'm getting too many complaints about your writing. And nobody can teach somebody to be a good writer. You just have to write. But I can make you accountable for becoming a better writer, because if you're not published twice in the next year, I will have to fire you. Okay? And then all of a sudden, it was the deer in the headlights had to produce 2 articles. Fortunately, I think I get the last one in just before the end of that year. But the thing is that, and this was 1982, and people weren't relying on, BlackBerries and phones, et cetera. They were really craving the articles and the publications. And, you weren't even downloading back in those days. It was being delivered in the mail.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that the thing that about writing that's a foundation right now is it's people read. People have various issues here in terms of reading, but they're too focused on the headlines and not the logic that brought the people to their headline conclusion. They're ignoring some of the inputs, they're ignoring some of the research, and they're too persuaded about what the outcome is and not the process to get there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I had a similar story, although not quite as harsh. I was in the middle of writing my doctoral dissertation, and my facts were good, my data was good, my statistics were good, everything was good. My narrative around it was horrible. And my advisor, chair of my committee, was this little tiny lady named Birga Jung, Jung, and I believe directly related to the real Dr. Jung from the old days. But she pulled me aside and she goes, I'm going to give you a bunch of short little exercises that relate directly to rewriting all of this stuff that is unreadable right now. And I want you to do that. And she sort of coached me through that process, but I was coming up on a hard deadline for my, dissertation, publication, all that other sort of stuff. So that's kind of where I got there. And so to circle back around to the second point that you miraculously and wonderfully and smoothly transitioned us to is people that are reading the headlines. And, when we were sitting around during COVID, I went and I did what I always do when I have more time on my hands than I need, and I grabbed books.
Sure.
And I reread books. I reread this one about 6 or 7 times, The Warrior Ethos by Stephen Pressfield. Short little book, you can read in about an hour and a half. But why would I read a book 6 or 7 times? And you know the answer to this, because the first time you read it, you get the general feel, right? The rhetorical feel, the power of the writer to get it through to you. You get the headlines. The second time, you start to see the nuances. The third time, you start to critically evaluate their arguments. And the fourth or fifth time, you pull the lessons, right? And I do a lot of reading. I'm a speed reader and all that other kind of stuff. But without that process, I never get to trust what I'm reading, right? Because the critical thinking involved in getting beyond the headlines. Okay? And what struck me as so disappointing about what happened during COVID was the absolute refinement of the attention economy online to suck people into those phones, get them polarized about something, politics, abortion, gun control, economics, Team Vampire versus Team Werewolf, what your latest favorite actor was doing during COVID, something, anything. And it hooks people, right? Now I can recognize the bait being dangled in front of me. And for the most part, not always, but if there's something on a good bass boat or a new technique for pulling that lunker up from underneath a log, yeah, I'll probably stick on that longer than I should. But for the most part, I can get myself out of it. But I don't think and I don't want to throw any generations under the bus, but let's just say anybody that grew up as a digital native in the last 20 years, I don't think they have those skills. And I think that bodes very bad for their ability to climb into senior positions and still evaluate data critically. I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, one of the things as part of the consulting we're doing right now is when we're working with high potentials, because of this issue here in terms of the problem with writing and the research associated with going out and finding facts to support it. Okay. What we're demanding of high potentials right now is this concept of white papers. Okay. The future of, the challenges of, et cetera. You know, the future of your business, the future of your product. Okay. The future of, globalization as it relates to your company. And we want white papers. Okay, that's part of it. And what happens is when you're talking to, you know, people in we'll call them the younger millennials, the older millennials through the Generation Z, what happens is just that exercise compels them to write. They don't like it. Okay. We did this exercise about 2023 within the discussion partner community. And what we did is decided that we would start rereading children's books to see if there were any tenets of leadership for our clients. And between the partners, I think we read over 50 children's books. And going back to your issue here of reading books for the second time, the keenest insight that we derived from that when we were talking about it was, Jesus, if we'd only been paying attention, some of the stupidity that we were reading about, you know, would have gone away. You know, during COVID, my wife was in Peru and I was here in Greater Boston, and we were separated for about a year. Okay, so I mean, I became a voracious reader. I mean, Jeff Bezos was dropping off books at least 3 times per week. And what was happening is they were books I had read before, okay, because I just wanted to see them again, political philosophy and history. And, you know, there's just me and the squirrels. But I think that the thing that I come back to is writing is a lost art. Reading is something that we need to reinforce, particularly with this younger generation. I have 4 grandkids. All of them, one's about to graduate from college, one's about to go into college. And I'm like nuts giving them books. And I'm not sure they're reading it. And it's not just my books, it's ones on history as well.
Yeah, it's, and I will tell you that, I don't know if you experience this or not, but I have seen my own attention span shorten dramatically. Right?
Sure.
Because I try to keep aware of everything, right? I'm on every newsletter, every safety, leadership, quality, mental health thing that's out there. And so there's so much coming at you. When I sit down with Stephen Pressfield, I'm not trying to push Stephen Pressfield's book, but he's the guy that wrote The Hot Gates, which was made the movie 300 off of, best damn semi-fiction, but based on reality book I think I've ever read about military history. When I sit down to read, I get a little, I don't know what the word is, anxious after about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Can I stay focused? And man, I used to read for hours and just devour the written word. But I noticed my own attention span shrinking, and I thought, well, maybe it's because of age. And then I do a little research and find out, no, it's not. I'm being infected with the attention economy. I'm programmed to feel anxious if I'm not looking at my computer.
Or you know, the thing is that you think that there's something going on that you're missing because you're doing something that is very good. But circling back to the way you started this interview, and let's talk about writing and let's talk about the military. Okay, just as an example. Some of the best books that I have read in the recent past, okay, have been Jim Mathis's book, Admiral McRaven's books, the Admiral, I don't want to mispronounce his name, but was the head of NATO, his books, including fiction, General McFarland's books, the National Security Advisor. You have a lot of this military people that are what we call the soldier, you would call them too, the soldier scholars. Okay, Mathis, I think, has 9,000 books that he travels with, and he's always got Thucydides' book in his briefcase, and he looks at it all the time. You have this issue here, Tony, and I'm trying to draw the direct line here, is there's the intellectual curiosity that is only enhanced by those people who want to understand the viewpoints of others, not just their own bias. And they want to understand the lessons learned by people who were challenged as leaders. And that's the part that's really troubling me with all of this distress and upset in terms of the military leadership. And, frankly, military leaders, their lifespan is a little longer than CEOs in Fortune 100 companies right now, that I don't think that they're long enough to unpack with the churn that's going on there. So what's happening is, part of it is the military piece, part of it is performance, but the other part of it is politics. Commercial, it's not that much different. But the tolerance right now is a challenge. But even more importantly is, who are you going to put your faith in? What leaders are you going to say, okay, this person is worthy of me committing to completing my mission if I'm a military incumbent, or I'm an employee of a company?
Yeah, so you referenced Thucydides, and I know Mathis is a huge fan too. I've got the history of the Peloponnesian Wars up here on my bookshelf. He's got a great quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Maybe I'll get it exactly right. But it speaks to exactly what you're saying. It says, the nation that draws too big a difference between its soldiers and its scholars will have its children taught by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Isn't that a great line? Isn't that a great line?
And I think you actually nailed it. I think that the other thing is that you look at decisions that leaders would make. I'm going back to Jack Welch, just to draw this correlation on development of people. Under his leadership, they bought NBC. Okay. And he had a vision of moving from broadcast journalism onto cable, et cetera. But he was highly criticized when he persuaded his board to buy NBC. What are you thinking? I mean, this is loss, and he said, even if I made a mistake strategically buying it, it's going to be a great place to develop people. All right. And that's one of the things that we're seeing with our clients coming out of COVID, working with high potentials and executives on their succession and the next stage of what are they going to do. What you're seeing is right now is everybody that we're talking, not everybody, most of the people that we're interacting with want to understand themselves first and what's the right thing to do second, and how can they inspire people third. And it is in that sequence.
I think that self-awareness, and we're slowly running out of our normal time slot here, so I'll kind of bring this around to close with a final question. I think you're absolutely correct with that self-awareness, and it mirrors our research as well. At the end of the day, people that don't have a known purpose in their own lives become mercenaries in the battles of others. And it's very easy to climb the ladder being a mercenary, right? Or a yes man, or yes woman. But it's very hard to stay there if you're not anchored to other things, right? And one of the, maybe you can help me find this person, but so I have now 40, 50, 60 or more of these stories about military leaders being fired that you can never find out about, right? Because everything's buried in the legal documents, and the only thing they ever say is he or she was fired for loss of confidence.
Right.
And as you mentioned, some of that's political, but some of it's behavioral, right? Some of it. And so what I think we need to find, Tom, is we need to find an active duty military officer that's at one of the war colleges, probably a JAG, somebody that's in the legal community, that would write a master's thesis where they could de-identify everybody and say, hey, I looked at all this stuff. I looked at these 100 commanders over the past 20 years that were fired for cause. And here's how it breaks out. And I'll bet you anything.
Yeah.
I'll bet you my next month Air Force retirement check that your data, hypocrisy, bias, intolerance, expediency, aggression. Now, the aggression piece, I think you're going to find out a lot of people just use power for their own purposes, take advantage of other people, bullying, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Right. So that would fit somewhere in there. But I'll bet anything, if you looked at that model of reprehensible behaviors and use that as a shredding device for that research, you'd really find some interesting things. So maybe we can find that person. Maybe they'll be watching this podcast.
Well, the person that I'm really impressed by, just paying attention to his career, is General Austin, the former Secretary of Defense. Okay, for three reasons. One is he deployed to diffuse a situation at the start of the Ukrainian war. He deployed what we call the predicate. Okay, the predicate is basically making a statement that you know you're 100% confident in, whether it's your capabilities or it is the situation. And he was talking to his counterpart, and he was basically saying, look at all of this talk about using tactical nukes because if the war isn't going well for you, you're going to have to stop it. You're only alarming the world. You know you're not going to do it. That gets us involved. And his counterpart said, and this is in Bob Woodward's book, his counterpart said, I don't like being threatened. And General Austin essentially said, sir, I'm the leader of the most powerful military in the history of the world. That's a statement of fact. Okay. You find this statement of facts of the predicate, General Austin, who nobody ever heard of, okay, outside of the military until the recent past. But there's others like him, Admiral McRaven. Okay, nobody knew who he was until the hunt for bin Laden. Okay, outside the military. These are people who are soldiers. They're the broadest interpretation of military. And they're the ones who are still with us, and I want to hear more from.
Yeah, it's interesting times, that's for sure. And, I think the other thing, I'll come back and we'll close on this, I think. The whole attention economy is so dominant right now. Rhetorical skill sets out there that blow most people out of the water have got us focused so in close that, and being a historian, every historian thinks he's a futurist. I'd be willing to bet 25, 30, 40 years down the road, which I won't be around to read, but I'd be fascinated by what's discovered here, this is a new crucible for leadership, right? In this era. There were new leaders that came out of the industrial age, right? I don't believe we've truly seen the leaders yet that are coming out of the information age. And you could say, well, what about Facebook, and what about Elon and PayPal? What about Jeff Bezos? Those guys all grew up out of the information age, but with the exception of Facebook, not specifically because of it, right? And so I think you've got your early big financial successes, but I think the kind of leader you and I are talking about is being molded in a different way. I firmly believe that the eternal things that you have in your books, empathy, transparency, accountability, collaboration, those are all going to be part of the equation. But I think there may be other things, and I just don't know what those are. So I'll give you the last word, Tom, and I want to say thanks again before we close out here.
Well, the last word is thank you, but the really interesting part for me is it's really going to be exciting to see who rises and secures a terrific reputation for who they are, not only what they do.
Yeah.
And that's the evaluation that I think you and I have been talking about inferentially since we started.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Who they are, not necessarily for what they do. And hopefully, who they are will shape the outcomes of what they do and
Right.
maybe shape that next generation that comes after us. So, hey, with that, I want to wrap up. Thanks, Tom, for joining us here. I think we have a lot more we could talk about. Really would love to talk to you more about this concept that's used all over the place that I think is misunderstood, and that's empathy. I think we toss that word around too casually uh, because it can mean so many different things, and I'd love to talk more with you about that. I think the whole concept we've drilled down into today of expediency, near term results with long term implications. I love the idea of uh, future collaboration on talking about these differences and similarities between the military and the corporate world, because I think somebody like you would have some fascinating insights on being able to merge those two. Especially, I'll just toss this out there: the people that you never see somebody that comes out of the corporate world that then makes a big splash in the military, because that's not how the military works, right? You come up from the bottom, but you always see these people that come out of the military that are sitting on corporate boards and in charge of large organizations. And some of the things they bring with them are helpful, some of the things not so helpful. So just a whole myriad of things that we can talk about in the future. For all of you listening today, thanks so much for joining us. I think we've given you a lot to think about. A couple of things that stuck with me is take the time to read, fight the urge to only go as deep as the headlines that you're seeing. Find out what you're all about, not necessarily just what you want to accomplish. And those are probably some good keys to climbing the leadership ladder. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us here on Only Human this week, and we will see you again soon.